Okay. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the December 4th, 2023 CAC meeting. My name is Stephanie Koch. I'm with TEA, and I will be co-facilitating this meeting this morning with our CAC chair. Before I turn it over to her, I would like to welcome our newest member. Her name is Lori Brown Duncan, and she is from Hutto, and she is a parent representative. So, Lori, would you like to turn your camera on and say anything to everybody?
I cannot get my camera to come on, unfortunately. Sorry for that. I did try.
That's okay.
But yeah, so I am Lori Brown Duncan. I do live in Hutto. I'm a family nurse practitioner. I guess my specialty is that I have a special needs kiddo. She has a chromosomal abnormality that's very rare called Soto syndrome, but it just causes multiple kind of an array of different things. The biggest being epilepsy, uh, hypertension, kind of global delays. So she was special ed through her whole career in school.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you for joining us and welcome. And now,
Thank you.
I will turn the meeting over to your chair, Amy.
We are glad to have you. And the first thing that I'm going to do is ask for assistance in accepting the meeting recording on the screen so that y'all can see. Can someone grab the meeting recording screen on the computer that's connected? Yeah. So that y'all can see what you're doing. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So the first thing that we are going to do is we are going to take a roll call since we have so many new members. So I'm going to take roll. Please say here or present when I call your name. Agatha Thibodeau.
Present.
Amy Litzinger is present. Deanna Nelson.
Present.
April Estrada.
Present.
Joanne Wofford.
Present.
Kevin Markle.
Present.
Adrian Guerra.
Present.
Marissa Esquivel. Susan Nichols.
Present.
Janie Melendez.
Present.
Claudia Cavazos. Tara Ceballos.
Present.
Lori Brown Duncan.
Present.
Aaron Banger.
Here.
And Cheryl Wall.
Present.
If those of you who are in the room with me could mute your microphones and your devices, that would be helpful with the echo.
Well, here's the thing.
So I would like to officially welcome you to the December 4th meeting of the Continuing Advisory Committee for TEA. As you know, we are working on our report rather intensively today. But we do welcome any public comment. And if you're not already signed up for public comment and you want to comment, please let us know in the chat by the first half hour of the meeting. I am really glad that all of our new members are here because we are going to have some time on the agenda to break up out into our work groups, but because of the Open Meetings Act, we are going to move that to the end of the agenda for after the public meeting. So our agenda is going to look a little different than it usually does, but I'm excited about it. So I gave you again the link to our webpage should you wish to peruse it. Last year's recommendations, updates from regular session, our duties as stated are we are to advise TEA of unmet needs within the state in the education of children with disabilities, comment publicly on any rules, regulations proposed by the state, advise TEA in developing evaluations and reporting on data to the secretary under section 618 of the act. We advise TEA in developing corrective action plans to address findings in federal monitoring reports. And we advise TEA in developing and implementing policies relating to the coordination of services for children with disabilities. Advise TEA in setting standards related to significant disproportionality determination. We are required to submit a report to the legislature biannually with recommended changes to state law and agency rules relating to special. So our report is due to the legislature by January 1st of 25. We are going to try to get everything routed by August 15th of next year. The CAC committee report is recommended to state law and agency rules relating to special education. And we are also including our current policy on encouraging public participation. So today, TEA is going to give us many updates that we asked for. I'm glad y'all are so enthusiastic. That we are talking about HB 3928, special education funding, complaints data, dyslexia, travel vouchers for us at the CAC, the SHARS billing process, and CAC surveys. Then we're going to talk about legislative updates. We're going to compare our report. Then we will determine next meeting dates and add agenda items for the next meeting. And then we'll adjourn, and then because we're all gathered after we adjourn the meeting, we will use breakout room to break out into our subcommittees. And I have some suggested agenda points for your subcommittee meetings today as well. So as we talked about last time, I have set up a calendar that we may wish to keep in mind. So in January 2024, we are going to continue to meet as work groups. Then in February, we'll have another quarterly meeting and we'll read out our recommendations from these sub work groups. And then we'll make suggestions during that meeting for the work groups to respond to suggestions. In March, we'll have another quarterly meeting to finalize our content and vote. And then in June and July, the formatting committee will meet and organize the report. And then in August, we'll meet again. If we need to, we'll revote and then we'll route the recommendations. Anyone have any questions?
Amy, this is Agatha. I was just wanted to ask if you would clarify with our report not being due until January of 2025. What is the reasoning to try and have it finalized by August?
So that if TA has any questions or comments for us or anything that we need to add, then we'll have the opportunity to go back and fix that before it officially has to be out for the legislature.
Okay.
Yes.
May I mute? Oops, no.
Hey, Aaron, we can't hear you.
Agatha, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, apologies. When I go on mic on my computer here, we get a ton of feedback. What I was saying was, given that we've got representation from TA here, we've got Kristen and Stephanie, I would hope that they would be able to give us feedback throughout the process. And so, Amy, given saying that you wanted to wrap things by August to give them an opportunity to review things, is that a different part of TGA that we're looking to do that? Or?
You're super quiet. We still can't hear you.
Am I coming through?
Unfortunately, you're just echoey. Aaron, we could hear you over by Amy. It's just if you were closer to the microphone, we could hear you better.
All right, how about now?
Still an echo.
Am I coming through now?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay. Good to know. So, this Aaron, what I was asking about is, given that we have representation from TEA here in the meeting and throughout our meetings, both Kristen and Stephanie, I was wondering if there was, in terms of why we wanted to have it done by August for TA review. Was there a different part of TA that was reviewing, or something that, and if there is something different than that, is there a way to do that more in parallel to our work? The main reason I would ask is if we have recommendations and feedback, things we want to turn into our report, to make sure that's as up to date as possible before we deliver to the governor and the legislature.
I will ask questions about how we can make sure that we get enough feedback as we're writing it. I will follow up on that. But thank you for the question. And now we are ready for our TEA updates.
Okay, thank you so much. We do have quite a few people with TEA with us this morning, so thank you everybody for joining us. The first item we have is legislative updates and anything on SPED funding, possibly some 504 updates for some data. And we have Kristen McGuire. She is the Senior Director of SPED Policy Programs and Reporting. So Kristen, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks, Amy. Good to see all you this morning. Thank you for joining. I have I know you guys have quite a few of my awesome colleagues on this call today. So I just wanted to follow up fairly briefly on some data requests that were asked at the last meeting, and then just some general just kind of updates given where we are in the legislative session and some rulemaking status based on some legislation. So I first wanted to just go over some data that was asked last meeting around Section 504 numbers. So we have a few slides in relation to Section 504 numbers. And this is representative 2022-2023 school year. So these are the numbers from the early education grades, and then the pre-K, kindergarten up through grade 12. So this is in relation to the count by grade level and then the percentage that makes up that particular grade level. I wanted to also mention in that there were just, some general questions about kind of the last few years of total numbers of 504 counts. And so you can see that started from 1819. The 2023-2024 data, we typically calculate based on that October fall submission from districts. So we won't really get access to that until probably February or March. So, you know, I can give you updated numbers of, you know, SPED numbers and of course 504 numbers in your spring meetings as well. And then we had some questions on dyslexia identification and kind of whether students were receiving accommodations under 504 plans or whether they were receiving individualized education programs under special education. And so this is just kind of a trend line you see from 2014-15 up until 2022-2023. With the you know, passage of House Bill 3928, you know, before that, and of course, subsequent to that, we do expect to see shifts in the a larger special education percentage as we, you know, move through the next several years. So I want to pause and just ask if anybody has any observations or any questions they wanted to ask about any of these data slides. Aaron, I believe you were one of the ones who had asked for it. So I just wanted to see if this addresses what you wanted or if you wanted some other information, especially as well.
Aaron did drop a question in chat. I can read it to you if you'd like, Kristen.
Oh, okay. Oh, I got it. Okay. How many
Sure.
students were receiving services under special education compared to the 407 receiving 504? There are about 704,000, I think. I'll double check before I log off, but I think there was 2023, there was over 700,000 receiving special education services, but I'll double check and give you a hard number in the chat.
Okay, I don't see any other questions in chat.
Okay. All right. So then just wanted to go over just a few things in terms of legislative and rulemaking updates. Obviously, we're still in the fourth special session of the 88th. And at this point, there are kind of some school safety bills still possible as far as getting passed, but nothing in relation to funding at this time. I did want to mention in terms of some rulemaking, so our supplemental special education services, SSES. So that is that in the regular session did have a bill that kind of deleted the expiration date of that program. So that program will continue. At this point would still be subject to appropriations in the General Appropriations Act. So in that particular bill, the program was appropriated, I think about $64 million the first year of this biennium and $30 million the following year of the biennium. We had a pretty significant wait list, and that is starting to be funded at this point. So we do expect probably to be on another wait list again until we can access the other $30 million for the next 2025 year. So we will keep an eye on that. Obviously, we will, you know, kind of use the sort of what's accessed and any wait lists to, you know, answer lawmakers when they ask next session when they start talking about what a reasonable amount to appropriate is for that. And again, for those of you who might not be familiar, this is the program where parents are given access to $1,500 to purchase goods or services to assist students that receive special education services. So one change that the agency will begin implementing is an application window. So that will start this school year. And that is for several reasons, just because it is primarily, you know, a way to help administer the program fairly and also to be able to prioritize the students who are required to be prioritized under the statute. which are those who receive or are eligible for a comp ed allotment, which is a few things, but generally those who are low socioeconomic status. We also will plan to put some rule changes forward to kind of bring the program up to date and the rules up to date. And so we will be in touch on that process. And then, so I would expect by mid-December to see much more information on our website about the application window and any updates to that. So I will keep Stephanie apprised of that so she can let you know, of course. And then lots of rule changes in relation to HB 3928. I know you've got my great team members, Dawn and Michelle, talking to you later a little bit more about that particular bill. But we've got some changes necessary in many of our commissioner rules due to that bill. We also have changes in 89-1053, which is on procedures for use of restraint and timeout. That is due to Senate Bill 133, which the action of that particular bill is not specific to students with disabilities, but it does prompt changes to our rules on that. So we are internally making some drafts to those, and then we will be in touch with potential and possible wording for those proposed amendments. Of course, all of those go through the rulemaking process, which of course has a 30-day public comment period once those proposals are out. And then of course the agency reviews all of the comments and then ultimately makes those final decisions related to the commissioner rules. So we will keep you posted on that. Also, because of House Bill 3928, the State Board of Education does have to make some rule changes to their rule on dyslexia and related disorders, as well as the dyslexia handbook. Those requirements are due by no later than June 30th, 2024. State Board meets quarterly, so their next meeting is at the end of January. So they will likely have this topic on the next few agendas of theirs to get those through the rulemaking process as well. And then the other arm, SBEC, our State Board for Educator Certification, just wanted to give you a heads up that they have a meeting this Thursday and Friday. And one of the agenda items on their meeting is just a discussion item, so no action, but there is a discussion item to discuss special education teacher certification. It's mostly a discussion reserved around the concept about special education teachers when they are like teachers of record or teaching content, and what the requirements are for those particular teachers. So you can of course search SBEC on the TEA website and you can find those agenda items, or I can send them to Stephanie if you would like to just kind of review what they have posted as far as their preparation for the meeting. But that is just, a heads up I wanted to let you know of. And then House Bill 3 in the regular session that was a very large kind of school safety bill. There was a provision in there that requires the agency to develop emergency guidelines to ensure the safety of students and staff with disabilities during an emergency. And so that those guidelines are required to be developed in consultation with various stakeholders. So we have identified a group for that, and they have their first meeting this week to start the discussion process on that. So I suspect at least a few meetings to get that done, and hopefully here later in the spring, we will have those guidelines developed. I do anticipate that there will, even though it's not a formal rule, I do anticipate us most likely, putting out something for, overall public comment as well. And then several other proposed commissioner rule amendments in the coming months, as of course, because, we had 3928 and some other legislation prompting rule changes. It also is giving us the opportunity to look at a lot of our current rules and see either over the years what we've had lots of questions about, or people needing clarification. And also, many times when statutes changed or subsections changed to particular statutes, sometimes those rules can get outdated with previous iterations of statutes. So lots more of those to come in the next several months, and so we of course will keep you updated on that. Kind of a standing item, of course, for me is just special education funding. Unfortunately, at this point, nothing has passed in this session that directly impacts special education funding. So, of course, we did have several bills through going through the process that incorporated many of the Special Education Funding Commission's recommendations, but nothing has passed as of yet. It's not clear whether another special session will be called. So we are just on the wait and see watch. So that is, I believe, it for me, unless anybody has any particular questions or any follow-up they would like me to provide at the next meeting.
Don't see anything in chat, Kristen.
Okay, well, I'll be hanging on. So if you think of anything, just you can shoot a chat, but I will, Aaron, as far as your number for the special education numbers, I'll send that in chat in just a second.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
Appreciate that. Okay, our next speaker from TEA is Keith Swink. He is the Special Education Complaints Director. Keith, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, good morning, everyone. Can you see my screen?
We can.
Okay, great. So I'm going to be talking to you today about findings of noncompliance that were determined during the federal fiscal year 2023. What the federal fiscal year means, it is July 1st through June 30th. So the data that we're talking about today were gathered from July 1st of 2022 to June 30th of 2023. And the reason why I'm reporting on those data is because that's what we report to OSEP each year. So that's why we do our data collection and reporting based on the federal fiscal year. So during 2023 federal fiscal year, we received the most complaints we have ever received, bar none. We received 979 formal special education complaints. Of those, 67% were sufficient. And what that means is that they met requirements for a special education complaint that are set out in IDEA. The 33% that were inefficient, most of those were complaints that did not relate to special education. In other words, they were complaints, for example, about personnel related issues or Section 504 issues or something along those lines that we don't have jurisdiction to investigate through the complaints process. So there were 658 sufficient complaints. We investigated 549 of those. And the ones that were not investigated, 15% were withdrawn due to local resolution. And so what that means is that the complainant and the school district were able to work out a resolution for the complaint, and the complainant withdrew the complaint. And then 2% ended in abeyance. And what that means is that those complaints were put on hold pending a due process hearing. Or possibly a mediation, but mainly a due process hearing. If a complaint and a due process hearing are filed on the same issues, then we have to put the complaint in abeyance. We don't have the authority to investigate that complaint until the due process hearing is over, and only then if the hearing officer did not issue a determination on the issue. So 549 investigative reports were issued, and 54% of those had findings of noncompliance. Historically, and just kind of off the top of my head, that's about normal. And in terms of percentage of noncompliance, it usually ranges between, I think, like 52 to 55%. of investigative reports end in some kind of finding of noncompliance. That's kind of historically always kind of been that way. I have no idea why. That's just kind of where it's always kind of fallen. So the primary areas of noncompliance, what you have here, the bright blue are the number of allegations investigated. Now keep in mind this is allegations, not complaints. So for example, one complaint may have 2 or 3 different allegations related to IEP implementation, for example. So when you're looking at the 456 number here, that's the number of allegations raised related to IEP implementation. It's not the number of complaints related to that. So just kind of keep that in mind. So the number of allegations is in the bright blue. The number of allegations substantiated is in the dark blue. And then the percentage is what is the percentage of allegations that were substantiated or found to be non-compliant. It is interesting to us that IEP implementation has historically always been the highest number of allegations we receive. Like I've been doing this for 18 years. IEP implementation has always been the allegation that we have the most often. IEP development has always been kind of right up there as well. But what we're not kind of interested in are the ones in which the higher percentage of substantiation. So in other words, down here, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a little bit. Even though there were 65 allegations investigated related to restraint or timeout, which is far fewer than IEP implementation, there were 58% of those that were found to be non-compliant. So in other words, 58% of the allegations raised related to restraint or timeout, we found that a school district did not do, or a charter school did not do what it was supposed to do. Same way with here with certified personnel. We found that in 52% of the allegations that we investigated, 52% of the time districts or charter schools did not have certified personnel providing special education instruction. Now keep in mind, certified personnel, this only relates to special education instruction. This is not general education. We don't have authority over general education instruction. So what this looks like, it would be someone, for example, teaching a resource math class who may be certified in special education, but they don't have the math content certification, or they don't meet certification through House to teach that class. It could also be a paraprofessional who is providing inclusion support, but that individual is not overseen by a certified special education teacher. So the certified personnel kind of is a big category that can house a lot of different things, but 52% of those were substantiated. Some other things that you notice here: access to student records. This is where a parent requests access to a kid's education record, and the district did not provide that access in the timeline required. Initial evaluations and eligibility. This could be anything from the initial evaluation was not conducted on time, or the eligibility determination was not made on time. Content of the IEP. This is just literally what it says. Was the IEP, did it have the content that it was supposed to? Development of the IEP, we'll talk about in just a second. So under IEP implementation, the primary area of noncompliance is accommodations. There were 192 allegations related to implementation of accommodations. 51% of those was substantiated. Same with class schedule. This could be anything from the kiddo was supposed to get inclusion support and didn't get inclusion support, or was supposed to be in resource math class, but instead, for whatever reason, was scheduled to general education math class, or vice versa. So that's those kinds of things here. Even though we didn't have that many allegations investigated, the percentage of substantiation is relatively high. So this, we'll talk a little bit more about this in just a minute. Behavior intervention plans and then IEP goals were also, part of the IEP implementation issue. Under IEP development, the two biggest categories is behavior and academic progress. So under behavior, what we look for is to see if the student was exhibiting behavior concerns and whether or not the IEP team revised the IEP to address those concerns. There were 94 allegations related to that topic. Basically, a third of them were substantiated. Under academic and IEP progress, this looks to see if a kid was failing to make progress or expected progress in the general education curriculum and or toward mastery of his or her IEP goals. There were 62 allegations in that topic area, and again, about half of those were substantiated. Well, 31% were substantiated. Sorry. So these are the two notable areas.
Keith, we can't hear you.
In 2022, we had 33 allegations related to restraint and timeout. That's a 97% increase. And in the number of complaints that were investigated. So that's a pretty big jump for over a year. We don't really have, well, I'll talk a little bit more about restraint in just a second. The other big jump was in certified personnel. We had 12 allegations in 2022, and then that jumped to 29 allegations in 2023. That's a 142% increase in the number of allegations raised related to certified personnel in the area of special education. And you can see that, again, the percentage of those that were substantiated, 58% of the allegations were substantiated here, 52% here. This is something that we don't ever want to see, but we are seeing it, restraint non-compliance trends. If you look from 2018 up to 2023, you'll see that there's a pretty significant jump. We do not have really any idea of why this is going on. I wished I could tell you that we had some reason, but we really don't. I see Janie, I see your question. I'll get to that in just a second. But we are seeing this. We've done some training to ESCs and SPED directors on restraint requirements. But this is just kind of what we're seeing. And again, we really don't have a reason why we're seeing this. We just are. That's the end of the data. Janie asked a question about what are the results of non-compliance. So it kind of depends on what the issue was, but mainly we do three things typically. One, we require the IEP team to determine compensatory services. That means that, for example, let's say a student did not get speech therapy for 2 months. Then we'll require the IEP team to go back and see if that student requires additional services to make up for that 2 months lapse. Okay. If a student's initial evaluation was delayed, then we'll require the IEP team to go back, and when the eligibility determination is made, or even after that, the IEP team must determine if compensatory services are needed to address the delay in the initial evaluation. So the first corrective part is really for that student subject to the complaint, or if it's multiple students, then for all the students that are affected by the non-compliance. We require the district or charter school to do an initial review of their policies and procedures. So, for example, let's say there's a policy that's in place that's causing the non-compliance to occur. We will make the district or charter school revise that policy, excuse me, and submit that to us to verify correction. We also require training for those individuals who are responsible for the noncompliance. So let's say, for example, a student's accommodations were not being implemented in his or her general education classes, then we will require those teachers, or quite possibly the entire campus, to receive training on requirements related to IEP implementation. Those are generally like the biggest areas that we address. For sometimes, if depending on the situation, if it's a systemic allegation, a systemic complaint, then we'll require much more than that. We'll require folder reviews and correct compensatory services for multiple students, that sort of thing. So it really kind of depends on the situation, but that's usually kind of what we see. I think there were some other questions.
Keith, this is Joanne Walford. I have a
Yeah.
question. How are these complaints coming in? Is it parent direct, or is it an advocate on behalf of the parent?
Most often it's parents filing. Yeah. We have an online system that we put into place about 3 years ago that has really helped parents file complaints, because it's in 5 different languages. The instructions are in 5 different languages, and all you have to do, you can do it online on your desktop, your laptop, your mobile phone, whatever. Go in, fill out the complaint form, hit submit. It sends it to the district and sends it to us. And so parents are primarily the ones who file complaints. So the question, whether mechanisms where a child filing complaint might go that wouldn't be reflected here. Not really, no. If someone, let me come back here, the child filing. If a complaint gets sent to anybody else in the agency, then they bounce that complaint to us. So this is basically where child fine would be raised. Consequences, I think we, so I addressed that. I'd like to know what the definition of restraint non-compliance. So what is the definition of restraint non-compliance? So that could be a number of things. It could be one, whether the restraint was used appropriately. In other words, under the rule, you can only use a restraint in the event of an emergency. And the rule defines emergency as potential serious bodily injury or potential serious property damage. Restraint can only be used in one of those 2 instances. You can't restrain a kid just because he or she won't get up off the floor, for example, right? And we've seen that. We've seen kids who were put in, restraints or transports, but simply because they wouldn't get up off the floor. They weren't doing anything to hurt anybody. They just weren't being cooperative. You can't restrain a kid just because he or she's not cooperative. Another thing that we see periodically is the restraint forms don't document everything that's supposed to be documented. The rule sets out some very specific information that a restraint form has to include, and the forms just may not have all that information. Another thing we see is a kid is restrained more than once, but only one restraint form is generated. So for example, let's say a student is restrained for 2 minutes and the situation passes, the restraint is released, and then 10 seconds, 30 seconds later, the kid begins hitting and punching and kicking again. So the kid is again restrained. And what we see is that the school will document that as 1 restraint instead of 2. And according to under the rule, that's 2 separate complaints. It requires 2 separate sets of documentation, 2 separate notifications to the parent, the administrator, and to TEA. So those are pretty much the 3 top things that we see in terms of noncompliance or restraint, is just not using restraint correctly, not documenting it correctly, or only documenting it one time when there were actually multiple restraints that were conducted. Let's see. The initial restraint is, so in terms of initial evaluations, that's going to fall under this let's see, under this right here. So, the school has 45 school days from the date of consent to conduct the initial evaluation. And then they have 30 calendar days to ensure that the IEP team makes the eligibility determination. So that's either one of those scenarios could be captured under here. You say there's not an understanding for the upward trend of, well, we know what, we have an understanding of kind of why complaints are kind of going up. Well, we think we do. In talking with other states during the summer, pretty much every state we talked to saw an upward trend in the number of complaints filed. And almost everybody, almost all the states said that it was because of lack of people to provide services. In other words, kids, during and post COVID, we had a lot of people leave the profession. And so there's just not enough staff across the country to teach special education, to provide speech or occupational or physical therapy or those sort of things. And so that's kind of anecdotally why other states were saying they have an increase in complaints. In fact, but we can say that there's a distinct correlation between the fact that complaints have gone up substantially, not just in 2023, but they were also high in 2022. We had 570, I think, in federal fiscal year 2022, which at that time was the highest we'd ever had. So we can see a correlation, but we can't necessarily point to a causation.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
About certified personnel. Does that include personnel who are certified to teach, but not necessarily certified in special education because the student is getting inclusion supports full time?
Okay, I'm not sure. I'm not following your question. What do you? So basically, what it can include, it can include a number.
Certified personnel, does that include students who are full time inclusion?
Yes. Yes. So for inclusion, inclusion can be provided through a paraprofessional, right? Like a paraprofessional, someone who's certified as an instructional aide, can provide inclusion so long as they are supervised by a certified teacher, right? Or certified SPED teacher. What we have seen is a couple of different things. One, either the person providing the inclusion support does not have a paraprofessional certification. Okay, so that you can't do that. Or two, they are providing inclusion support, but they're not being supervised by a special education certified teacher. They can't do that. So both of those scenarios are wrapped up in the certified personnel allegation.
Keith, when you say supervised, does that mean the special ed teacher and the para are in the same classroom at the same time?
No, not necessarily. It kind of looks, it can look different ways, and I don't want to speak off the top of my head about all the different ways it could look like, but it does not mean that the SPED teacher and the inclusion support staff are in the same room at the same time.
Keith, this is Kevin with TWC. I had a couple of questions. Is there a difference between or a distinction between allegation and complaint, or did you just use those terms interchangeably?
So that's a great question. So the complaint is the actual letter, for lack of a better word, that we get. And that complaint will have allegations in it. So in other words, for example, let's say you write a letter to the agency that says my kid was supposed to have gotten 3 hours of speech last month and didn't get it because the speech therapist was out, right? So the letter that you send to us is what we refer to as the complaint. The allegation is my kid did not get speech therapy services.
Got it. Got it. And the other question I had about that is, with the data that's collected on these complaints and allegations, is there any kind of data around disability groups, or in terms of maybe prominence and complaints with in relation to a specific disability, or do you all not necessarily look at that?
Hi, I'm so sorry. I dropped connection. Could you repeat your last question?
Sure. With respect to the data gathering on the complaints and related allegations, do you also take a look at the disability groups associated with the various complaints to kind of determine, certain prominence in certain disability types? Or is that something that's just not looked at?
No, we don't really collect that data. We have the data because we have the kids' IEPs that are submitted, but we don't collect that. We don't document that anywhere. Yeah, we don't have that.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. Okay, with any other questions?
I think you got them all out of chat. Thank you, Keith, so much. We appreciate your time.
No problem. Y'all take care.
Thanks. Okay, moving right along. Amy, do we never mind. Next up we have Dawn Vanderheel, who is the Child Find and Evaluation Coordinator for TEA, and Michelle Reeves, who is the State Dyslexia Coordinator. And they're going to talk about House Bill 3928 and its impact on dyslexia evaluation, identification, and instruction. And if you could hold your questions, please, and send those to me, then I will submit those to Dawn and Michelle, and we'll get an answer back to you. So, ladies, I will turn it over to you.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting us to join you this morning. I'm Dawn Vanderheel. I work on the technical assistance team in the Division of Special Education Programs. My colleague, Michelle Reeves, is the State Dyslexia Coordinator, and we work closely together. This is a brief overview this morning, and hopefully it will pique your interest. You may have follow-up questions. And again, if you'll submit those to Stephanie, we can get those answers to you in writing. Let me share with you, House Bill 3928 was passed by the 88th Texas Legislature during the regular session, and it impacts dyslexia evaluation, identification, and instruction. And the bill applies beginning with this school year, 23-24. Some resources that we provide to help get this information out to parents, families, schools, all our stakeholders. We have an overview video that we published in June. The to the administrator addressed was sent August 3rd of 2023. Appendix A, questions and answers to the dyslexia handbook, is available. It will be fleshed out much more after the State Board of Education meets. And last but not least, we have House Bill 3928, frequently asked questions. And our most recent update is November 15th, 2023. And all of these resources can be found at tea.texas.gov/dyslexia. So let's start with child find, where probably this is the beginning of the big changes to identification. So in our Texas Education Code, we talk about that if our local education agency, and as you know, we use that term to include not only our public school districts, but our charter schools, suspects or has reason to suspect a student has dyslexia and may be a student with a disability under IDEA, including after reading diagnostic assessments or screening, the LEA must. We have the agency has developed a new form, Overview of Special Education for Parents, very parent friendly. Because as you know, many of our students have been receiving dyslexia services under 504, and basically instruction is moving now under IDEA, and they may not understand that IDEA provides the student and family with more protection and rights. So we provide this form to them, etc. So we're going to be looking at evaluating the student in all areas of suspected disabilities, including dyslexia. This parent form is available in 27 languages at SpedTex. So here is kind of a summary of the big change. Think back to Kristen's slide that showed you how many students were receiving dyslexia services. And by that, I mean participating in an evidence-based dyslexia instruction. I'm not talking about accommodations. I'm talking about they're receiving evidence-based dyslexia instruction. I want you to kind of think back to that number. Section 504 committees must begin the process of discussing a student's continued need for an evidence-based dyslexia program and submitting referrals for full individual and initial evaluations. Absent any directives prescribed by the SBOE through its upcoming rule and handbook revisions, and here's what's important. TEA anticipates that each LEA should hold a Section 504 meeting as soon as possible, but no later than the end of the 24-25 school year, to determine whether the student continues to require an evidence-based dyslexia program. If so, the LEA must refer the student for an FIIE. I guess to summarize the big change, evidence-based dyslexia instruction is moving under IDEA, under special education. But as you know, we don't automatically just move a student. We require evaluation first. So let's talk about these full individual and initial evaluations when dyslexia is suspected. Again, under our Texas Education Code, and you also find it in IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, dyslexia and related disorders. Here's what we say. Dyslexia is an example of and meets the definition of a specific learning disability. So dyslexia is a specific learning disability. It's kind of, if you have a visual in your mind, think of the word dyslexia, add the equal sign, and now put specific learning disability. We, the agency, just published guidance for the comprehensive evaluation of specific learning disabilities. It is available on the Texas Sped Support website. The timing is especially meaningful because we just said dyslexia is a specific learning disability. There are specific we provide this if you look this guidance document up, I am just providing for you. You can see on page 23, 24. There are specific evaluation domains and questions outlined in the Dyslexia Handbook that must be used when determining the presence of dyslexia. So let me say this. We don't do a specific learning disability evaluation and then we do a dyslexia evaluation. No, it is the same evaluation. And there is no single instrument, score, or formula that will automatically rule in or rule out dyslexia. So what determines dyslexia? I would say most of our LEAs use what's called a pattern of strengths and weaknesses to identify dyslexia. So let's talk about that pattern of strengths and weaknesses. So there must be strengths. It's not all weaknesses. And the strengths could be in areas of performance and or achievement, including academics, intellectual functioning, behavioral, social, emotional, and language communication. And there are deficits, needs, weaknesses, whatever word you want to put in there, in reading words in isolation, which is your basic reading. It's decoding unfamiliar words and or reading fluency and spelling. And the student may have deficits in phonemic phonological awareness, rapid naming, and or orthographic processing. But notice it says may have. It does not say must have. And there is a difference there. So the multidisciplinary teams, and it is a team report, and that team includes the parent, must look for a pattern of evidence reflective of the primary characteristics of dyslexia. So we're looking for unexpectedly low performance in some or all of the following areas: reading words in isolation, decoding unfamiliar words accurately and automatically, reading fluency for connected text, rate and or accuracy and or prosody, and spelling. However, an isolated difficulty in spelling would not be sufficient to identify dyslexia. Again, it may be appropriate to ask, do these difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language? But we say to our multidisciplinary teams, be mindful that average phonological scores alone do not rule out dyslexia. And if you're wondering why, I'll give you just a brief answer to that. Eventually, over time, the good news is the phonological component with very good instruction will improve. And that's a good thing. So that's why you cannot say, well, their scores are average, so they can't have dyslexia. So there's some definite skill involved there. And are these difficulties unexpected for the student's age in relation to the student's other abilities? There's that unexpectedness and provision of effective classroom instruction. Has the student received effective classroom instruction? So here we go. Do the data show the following characteristics of dyslexia? Difficulty with accurate and or fluent word reading, poor spelling skills, poor decoding ability. But I want to emphasize again, the data is not based on a single score or formula. The data is based on multiple sources of data and the preponderance of that data. And no one piece of data is weighted more heavily. Now that may be a little bit more than you wanted to know about the evaluation for dyslexia, but believe me, if that's not enough, we have a voluminous document about it. So I laugh at myself anyway. So you may be wondering, well, where does dysgraphia fall in all of this? Because we're primarily talking about dyslexia. Well, remember, we talk about dyslexia and related disorders. Well, related disorders speaks to dysgraphia. And there is nothing that would suggest we don't look at the same things with dysgraphia. Dysgraphia is a specific learning disability. And again, we're looking at a pattern of evidence, a pattern, not a single score, not a single formula. We're looking at a pattern of evidence that would indicate unexpectedly low performance in handwriting, writing fluency, written expression, and or spelling. Again, there may be deficits in orthographic processing, but that's a may have, not a must have. Again, it is so important for our evaluation teams and for us to share with our families. This is based on the preponderance of the data. We collect all this data. What is the picture telling us? And sometimes there's data that contradicts each other. And we explain that in our report. Why does this seem to be contradicting each other? So yes, we do look at dysgraphia. Let me share with you, let me go back just one slide. One of the changes is, we're going to call it the dyslexia specialist. The state board is going to help us, is going to define what training is required. So you'll hear different terminologies. You may hear a CALT, dyslexia therapist, dyslexia specialist, dyslexia teacher. That person must be a member of the multidisciplinary team that evaluates for dyslexia. And that's a very good thing because these professionals have such a wealth of knowledge about dyslexia. So they are now a required, as a result of House Bill 3928, they are now a required member of the multidisciplinary evaluation team. Likewise, they are now a member of the Admission Review Dismissal, the ARD committee, when eligibility is being determined. So typically that'll certainly be at initial ARD meetings, and then likely at reevaluation, when reevaluation is being considered and reviewed. And again, here you have the member must hold a licensed dyslexia therapist, LDT license, could hold the most advanced dyslexia-related certification, or if neither of these is available, the member must meet the training requirements adopted by the SBOE. And this is where these are some of the decisions, and Michelle will talk about this a little bit later in the presentation, that the SBOE will be deciding. So, but the good news is this person is now a required member of the ARD committee meeting when eligibility is discussed, as well as the multidisciplinary team. And again, this talks about, because the SBOE must decide on certain qualifications and training requirements, each LEA should analyze the current credentials and qualifications of existing staff and determine who is most appropriately trained to meet the specific knowledge required by the bill. And this is the period of time we're in right now. And again, that person is a member of the ARD committee meeting when we are discussing eligibility. And this person will sign on the IEP document as a member. This person also, I should share with you, when annual goals are being developed, there will be a collaboration, and that's a very important word, between the special education teacher and the dyslexia therapist as they are developing annual goals for the student to meet their needs in the areas of reading. I'm going to quickly just review with you, which I know all of you know, eligibility. Remember, the multidisciplinary team does not establish eligibility. They certainly make a recommendation in their written report. However, remember, it is the ARD committee meeting that determines eligibility. And there are two questions to be answered. You'll hear people talk about prong one, prong two. The first is the ARD committee reviews evaluation reports and other appropriate information to determine whether a student has dyslexia. But it doesn't stop there. They also have to consider, they determine whether the student needs special education and related services, which now include evidence-based dyslexia instructions, services, program, or any other specially designed instruction to make progress. You can also think of a visual in your mind, if you would please. Think of the word evidence-based dyslexia instruction, and now think of an equal sign, and now think of specially designed instruction. Sometimes in the midst of all this language and content, a simplified visual can help, or at least I hope it does help. I am now going to turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Michelle.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to start here with special education services and evidence-based dyslexia programs, as we're talking about House Bill 3928 and the changes and impacts to school districts. So the bill modified Texas Education Code TEC 7.102C28 and states that the State Board of Ed program currently defined in the Dyslexia Handbook 2021 update may not include a distinction between standard protocol dyslexia instruction, or SPDI, and all other forms of direct dyslexia instruction. Dawn, are you showing your... Did you log out?
Yes, I'm sorry. Do I need to drive again?
If you don't mind driving, that'd be great. Yeah,
I'm
I didn't even notice
sorry.
until just now. That's okay.
My
That's
technology leaves a little bit to be desired. I am back on driving now.
Okay, great.
I
Thank you.
shared my screen. Are you seeing mine, Michelle?
I'm
Okay.
seeing somebody's.
Okay, cool.
Do you want to drive, Mandy?
Right.
You gonna drive?
Yeah, I can drive.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm going back to standard protocol dyslexia instructions. Sorry, you didn't see the slide that I was talking about. So this means that the ARD admission and review dismissal committee will continue to determine. Go back. Yeah, you're good. Okay. No, right there. Yeah. What type of instruction students need without distinguishing between standard protocol dyslexia instruction and specially designed instruction. So while the SBOE has until June 2024 to make these changes to the handbook, local education agencies need to operate as if there is no longer this distinction. And on these slides right here, you may have noticed there's a little icon up here, and we have a House Bill FAQ, which Dawn mentioned at the very beginning. The numbers coincide with more information from each one of these changes or updates. And also Dawn mentioned the visual. We actually have a visual here. So you can see standard protocol and other types of dyslexia instruction, including SDI equal special education service. So just the primary impact of this bill described, again, also more information in the FAQ. There's no distinction between standard protocol and any other type of dyslexia instruction, including specially designed instruction, SDI, and any dyslexia instruction equates to a special education service. So what this means is that students who are identified with dyslexia and who need dyslexia instruction to be successful are eligible for special education services. So in the previous iterations of the dyslexia handbook, there were situations in which dyslexia instruction could have potentially been provided under section 504, and sometimes under an IEP. So this is no longer true. So the need for dyslexia instruction will now always be considered a need for special education services. Okay, if you'll go to the next slide for me. Thank you. So providers of dyslexia instruction, Texas Education Code 29.0032, providers of dyslexia instruction, or a PDI, you may have seen, is added and provides guidance on training requirements for dyslexia interventionists. So a PDI must be fully trained in the LEA's adopted instructional materials for students with dyslexia. A PDI is not required to hold a certificate or permit in special education unless they are employed in a special education position that requires the certification. And then also the completion of a literacy achievement academy does not satisfy the training requirements to be a provider of dyslexia instruction. So again, if the provider is not special education certified, a special education teacher will still be involved in the services for a child. This might include indirect services or direct services in other areas, or to supplement reading difficulties. Texas Education Code 29.0031D stated that at least once per grading period or more often, if required in the IEP, the LEA must provide the parent or guardian of a student receiving dyslexia instruction information regarding their child's progress as a result of receiving dyslexia instruction. So this would apply regardless of whether the student receives dyslexia instruction under section 504 or through an IEP. And then when we talk about through section 504, remember this is as the transition, it will apply to them because we still have students that are being served as districts are making that transition. To the extent that the IEP goal progress report would not comply with this requirement for students receiving special education and related services, a separate progress report should be sent to comply with this piece of the bill. Okay, school board policy requirement. Under Texas Education Code 38.003B, it was revised and states that each board of trustees of a school district or governing board of a charter school must adopt and implement a policy requiring the LEA to comply with all rules and standards adopted by the State Board of Education to implement the program, including the Dyslexia Handbook and Commissioner of Education's guidance. Please note that compliance was required even without a board policy, but the new requirement is to ensure that this is the priority for boards to address. And this requirement also applies to charter schools. For dyslexia monitoring, Texas Education Code 38.003 C1 was revised to require TEA to create procedures through the rulemaking process to allow TEA to seek out parental input on an LEA's implementation of the dyslexia program as part of the agency's dyslexia monitoring process. So for the 2023-24 school year, each LEA is monitored will need to be prepared to respond to the questions associated with how they have adopted practices to comply with House Bill 3928. So placement in a disciplinary alternative education program. Subsection P was added to Texas Education Code 37.006 that now requires upon placement of a student in a disciplinary alternative education program, DAEP, a parent or guardian must be provided with information on how to request a full individual and initial evaluation, FIE, under the IDEA. TA suggests that school districts use language from the required student handbook statements regarding students who are experiencing learning difficulties when providing this information. Since the requirement refers specifically to initial evaluations, the requirement would not apply to students who are already served by special education. So please note that this does not apply to charter schools. Students placed in DAEP must be provided a personalized transition plan when returning to students' home campus. So prior to the amendment of this law, the campus administrator could, but was not required to provide as part of the personalized transition plan, a notice to a parent of their rights to request a special education evaluation. But the change in law now makes this a requirement. TEA suggests that school districts use the language again, for like I said in the previous slide, required from the student handbook statements regarding students who are experiencing learning difficulties when providing this information. And again, this does not apply to charter schools. Okay, State Board of Education actions that are still pending. And I think Dawn kind of briefly brought this up as well. So first of all, they must revise the dyslexia handbook by June 30th, 2024 to no longer provide a distinction between standard protocol dyslexia instruction and other types of dyslexia instruction, including specially designed instruction. And then determine the qualifications and training requirements for required multidisciplinary team admission review and dismissal ARC committee member when a student is suspected of and is later identified with dyslexia. So these are all of the impacts that Dawn and I have covered for you guys for the House Bill 3928. Thank you for having us. And like we said at the beginning, if you have any questions, if you'd please email them to Stephanie and then she'll get them back to us. Thank you all for having us.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Dawn. We appreciate your time this morning. And I'm happy to forward those questions if I receive them, no problem. Okay, moving on. I know that's a lot of information really quickly. This one is going to be less dense, and actually it's for CAC members who travel outside of Austin to come to the CAC meetings. We have with us today Terry Harrison, who is the head of travel at TEA, and he has some guidance for us. So Terry, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. So as this is a board developed by statute, we can reimburse your travel to TEA for these meetings. You are going to be reimbursed as a TEA employee. So as that, we do need to follow some state rules and laws. I'm going to kind of go over some high level rules and laws. I think we're still working out some of the particulars, correct, Stephanie?
Yes, that's correct.
And we're also still working, y'all will also have a liaison in Stephanie's office, and we're still working on getting that in place as well. So right now, I just want to cover some high level stuff and kind of get you familiar with what is available for reimbursement. I want to start out by mentioning that we will have to set you up as what we call a vendor. It's just a term. You're not an actual vendor. You'll be considered more of an employee, but it's a vendor form that I will need to send out to y'all. I'll be sending that out later in the week if your residence is not within the Austin area. Okay, so please pay attention to those. I'll have an email address on that I want you to send it back to. Please send it to that box, because that box is an encrypted and secured email box, because this form will ask for stuff like your social security numbers and home addresses. So we want that information secured. So please make sure you send it back to that email address that I have on it so that it goes to an encrypted box. As far as travel, you'll hear a lot about headquarters city. Well, for y'all, your headquarters city is the town that y'all live in. So if your headquarters is 50 miles or more away from Austin, then you're entitled to some travel reimbursements, mainly including lodging. So if you live outside of 50-mile radius, you can come into Austin and spend the night and get your lodging reimbursed. You will also be able to get meals reimbursed, but meals are not reimbursable unless you come into Austin and spend the night. So if you fly in the morning, attend the meeting, then fly out at night, there's no lodging involved, so meals cannot be reimbursed at that point. If you're driving in, you can claim mileage, and please remember that you should use MapQuest and to determine that mileage, and the state only reimburses up to the short distance on MapQuest. So if there's a another route that you like because it's safer, that's fine, you can take it, but the state can only reimburse up to the shortest route. Remember, these are taxpayer funds that we're reimbursing from, so they kind of want to make sure that we're conserving those funds as best as possible. That mileage rate for driving into Austin is set by the IRS. It's set at the first of the year. We do not know what it's going to be in 2024 yet, but right now it is currently 65.5 cents per mile. Once they do publish that, IRS does publish that new mileage rate, we will be getting that out to Stephanie, and she can push that out in a meeting after the first. So as far as lodging, the state reimburses up to the GSA rate for Austin. I have the GSA rate pulled up on my screen real quick. Let me share that with y'all so y'all can see this. Right now, the GSA rate is at $184 a night. The thing about Austin is in April, it does drop down to $170, and then it picks it back up in September. So kind of be mindful of that, because we can only reimburse lodging up to that daily rate, okay? That rate does not include taxes. Is my screen not sharing? Hold on, there it is. Sorry about that. So $184, it changes down in April, and then it goes back up in September. That is just the room rate. That does not include taxes, okay? As state employees, we are not exempt from hotel taxes, because a lot of that is local funds, so that needs to stay with the local municipalities. So we are not exempt from hotel taxes. When you're checking out, make sure you don't do the quick checkout, because you must get a receipt that shows a zero balance showing that you paid for the hotel. We must have what's called proof of payment. So we're looking for that zero balance hotel. Meals, once again, meals are allowed. If you have an overnight stay, the state does not pay a per diem. They pay actual cost of meals up to $69 a day. Meal receipts are not required, but they're highly encouraged. So keep that in mind. Some of the things that the state will not reimburse, of course, is personal items. So I'm sorry if you forget your toothbrush, stuff like that, those will not be reimbursed. If you forget your phone cord, that will not be reimbursed. Those are considered personal items. Tips are never reimbursable. The state considers those discretionary funds, so they do not reimburse tips, and of course, alcohol. So those are the very high level things right now. Like I said, we're trying to work some of the details out on the back end. Stephanie will get caught back up to you, and if she and y'all feel y'all would like me back once those are get worked out, I'll be more than happy to come back and meet with y'all again. In the meantime, is there any questions? That's really about all I have.
Terry, this is Adrian Guerra. I do have a question about becoming a vendor. I was in the Texas Commission on the Arts, and we used to get reimbursed for all this. Would I already be a vendor then?
Yes, you would. If you're already in the state system somewhere, somehow, you would probably already be a vendor.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for your presentation.
We would just have to get that vendor number for you, but we can look that up and find it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Terry, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate that.
No problem.
As of right now, if you are outside the Austin area and you've already traveled for a meeting, if you'll just hold on to those receipts, I will be sending you an email about that reimbursement process. Okay. So moving on, next on our agenda, we just had a couple of lingering items. One was, we had the question about, can the CAC create and distribute a survey? So I asked our legal department, and they are still investigating that at this point. So we'll have to put a pin in that and get back to you with an answer about that. Okay. And then the other issue was, we had a question about, can somebody from TEA come and talk about SHAR's billing? I reached out to our point of contact at TEA about SHAR's billing, And the response was, she is not able to discuss the billing process in depth, but if you want a point of contact at HHS, I have that information, so you can email me and I will provide that person's number and contact information for you at HHS. But TEA is not the one to discuss the billing process or anything, any legislative changes about SHARs. So those were the things on our agenda from TEA. And I can turn it back over to you, Amy.
So now we are going to talk about our legislative updates.
Hey, Amy, I had a quick question. I'm sorry. Just it was about public comments.
Yes.
We did have a request. The request came in at 9:55 for a public comment. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. And then also I sent to everybody via email this morning, we had a request for a public comment to come in, but that person was not able to attend the meeting either via Zoom or in person. So that person will be able to speak at the next, but we first on the lineup to make a public comment the next time we meet.
Good. I was wondering about that because I saw that come in. All right. We are doing public comments after our updates. Correct?
Okay.
No, that was a question.
Oh, it was a question. I think it's on the agenda after the TEA updates, then it was public comments.
That's fine. We should do it now, just so that we don't get them lost.
Right.
The meeting. So
Okay. So I think that's Stephen. Stephen's on Zoom this morning.
All right. Stephen, would you go ahead with what you have for us today?
Good morning. This is Stephen Alaman with Disability Rights Texas. I apologize if the sun is interfering a little bit with my camera angle, but in any event, I did want to address the CAC this morning, and actually it was perfect timing with regard to the discussion items earlier about planning your legislative recommendations report for next year and trying to get ahead of the schedule for its submission, as well as some of the information provided by TEA staff earlier this morning in the staff briefings. It all pairs together in reflecting my comments. I wanted to, again, remind the CIC that, of course, in your past report, you did address restraining seclusion issues. But my comment this morning, as you think about and plan for your committees, subcommittee work groups, whatever terminology you're using, to reiterate that, well, the numbers are growing about issues around restraint and seclusion. But my request is really to, and this was alluded to earlier, sort of drill down a little bit more about those incidents. Well, the numbers, if you look at the big picture of course, of the 700,000 plus students with disabilities we have in Texas, they don't seem to be of a significant magnitude from a numeric standpoint. But of course, for those individual students and the staff involved, the consequences of these restraints are enormous. And so to the extent that they happen with certain populations, I think, one, we want to understand that better, because that will, in turn, I hope, reflect and inform what policy recommendations we pursue. And really, I'll just conclude my remarks by saying that I think that drilling down into what you did last time and reflecting even further on what is more proactive assistance and guidance from the state is going to be very valuable. I think it in part couples with the comments you also heard and information heard about staffing issues. Those are obviously issues that are not going to go away tomorrow, but I think it all does wrap together about maybe one reason why we are seeing the restraint numbers escalate as we are. So again, I think that just taking the information you have, having a very proactive plan to work hard on your report early to get it done and giving you somewhat of a cushion next fall to complete it, I think is very smart. But I would just ask that as you review your past report, that we need more than just republishing it. We need to really drill down about understanding who's being affected, why restraint numbers are escalating, and what proactive recommendations you all can propose that advocates can support in 2025 at the Texas Capitol and with the TEA as it continues to do ongoing technical assistance and guidance to the field. With that, I'll conclude my comments. Thank you.
Thank you for addressing us today, and we will continue to follow up with you if we have more questions. Well, I'm going to share my screen again so that y'all can see the PowerPoint. So just to remind you, you've seen this slide before, but it's been a while. So issues in our last report and where they got to. So for school safety, SB 133 helped us with student resource officers in elementary schools. And parents can be more involved in threat assessment committees based on HB 473. Individualized safety plans for each IEP died in the Senate. For data privacy, a student's threat assessment evaluation will be erased as the student reaches age 24. There is a lot of discussion about mental health and contractors in schools that required students to answer mental health questions. For data, digital literacy and accessibility, HB 1 funded adaptive equipment and services for children with multiple disabilities through a nonprofit. We might want to put them on the agenda at some point. Staff qualifications, we should discuss continuing our recommendation for more training and certification. For educator prep, we made a lot of great strides as we just heard about, talking about dyslexia training. Also HB 159, which passed 2 years ago. That's hopefully being implemented well. Full and initial evaluations, students returning from a disciplinary alternative education placement may request those of the evaluations if they're not already being served. We just talked about that as well. Pre-vocational services were placed back into HHSC waivers to assist students via HB 4169, but coordination between agencies could be improved. But the interagency IDD council was not approved. Things that were not in our initial report, but that we might want to talk about this year. All dyslexia is moved into IDEA. The SSES program was made permanent. Accelerated instruction is no longer required after the STAR Ultra 2, and the Driving with Disabilities program was created, and many other changes to improve post-school transition and college experiences. So, sample issues that were not on our report that didn't make it. Digital literacy and accessibility, educational representatives for those that are over 18 that are not under guardianship, funding weights based on needs and not placements, juvenile justice charges brought by the school, paraprofessional training, licensure and pay, safety plans for to be individualized in each IEP, acute health, mental health, and social support in schools. So, the October special session, I told you guys I would give you an update. There's not really much to say, unfortunately. Vouchers didn't pass, but neither did school finance, because they tried to pass a bill that tied all funding to vouchers. This special session ends on December 7th. There's a rumor that we may have a new one called December 8th. We may also have one in January if things are not passed. Whether or not vouchers passes, we need to address how underfunded special education is right now generally. We need to fund the programs required for students federally. So,
Hey, Amy, I'm sorry. I've got a quick question on that last one. When you say vouchers, are you referring to the special education savings accounts?
yes,
Okay.
they're also referred to as vouchers. Yes. But
Oh,
yeah,
I wasn't aware that the bill stated it as vouchers.
yes,
It does state it as vouchers
they've been
or special education savings accounts.
they've been used interchangeably in all the bills over session. And we're going to go a little bit out of order because we're going to do our work group times at the end. So just to remind you before we do that, who's on which work groups. Digital access was Tara, Kevin, and Claudia, with Aaron leading it. Staffing, Janie is leading. We have Marissa, Adrian, and April. Behavior, April's leading with Adrian, Marissa, Deanna, and myself. Formatting is not meeting today, but it's myself, Aaron, and Agatha. Dyslexia, Janie's leading. Tara, Adrian, and April. Funding, Adrian's leading, and it's Janie and myself. Justice, I'm leading, and we have Janie, Kevin, and Lori. And then health and safety, I'm leading, we have Marissa, Janie, and Joanne. So, as far as next meeting dates, we need to set a meeting for, when did we say?
Amy, I think according to our bylaws, we have a meeting, the mandatory meeting that's set in February.
That's what I thought, but I wanted to make sure. So does anyone want to propose a date in February that might work? Or Stephanie, do you have some dates in February that you've checked with Region 13 for availability?
No, I have not checked with them, but if you guys come up with the date, I can chat them really quickly and they may be able to get back with me.
Do we have a day of the week that works for anyone particularly well?
Can we not have it on Mondays?
Sure. We can try to look for another day. I'm going to stop sharing so I can pull up my calendar and actually have a functional conversation.
How about February 7th, Wednesday, February 7th? How does that look?
So that's T-case. I think most of TEA is usually involved in some of that, so that might be a conflict.
Could we look at the 9th of February? That's a Friday. That, I believe that's after T case.
I can make that work. Does anyone else have any conflicts that we know of?
The 9th is on.
I'm actually out of the country the first 2 weeks, but I could try to hop on maybe for part of it, just depending on the time.
So when are you back? The 23rd or the 16th?
The 11th.
What about February 21st?
I have a meeting that I facilitate all day on the 21st.
22nd?
Well, it's all week. It's liaison week.
Oh, that's right.
So
You're
the 23rd would be okay. That's a Friday.
What about the 16th?
I'm out of town on the 16th, but the 23rd works for me for sure.
Me too, until like 11 o'clock, as long as we'd be done in the morning.
probably make that meeting that short if we have our work group meetings before then. But we probably need to make sure that we schedule at least one work group meeting before that full committee meeting. But I think that is doable if we start trying to schedule this week. I can send out some doodle polls to the work groups. So do we want to tentatively schedule for the 23rd? And then I'll check with the members who aren't here to make sure that we'll have quorum. And that's of course if Stephanie can get us space here in the building. Stephanie, would you like to direct message the building schedulers to see?
Yep, already did. So if I hear back while we're still meeting, I'll let you know.
Okay. Agatha, how are we doing on minutes for today?
As far as what?
As far as, do you think we'll be ready to approve them, or do we need to approve them next time? Because in order to do the work groups, I'm gonna have to formally adjourn the meeting. So I'm just wondering where we are in terms.
Yeah, I'll need to have them approved for the next meeting. And luckily it's mostly just TEA updates. So I can send them to you, but as far as approval goes, we'll probably have to do it in February during our next meeting.
Does anyone other than myself have possible agenda items and or action items for next meeting in February? And my possible one was that we need to address the committee makeup, because I've noticed that it's really heavily made up of educators and administrators. And y'all are really busy post-COVID, and I'm wondering if that would help with some of our quorum issues to add more members who are parents and self-advocates. So I was wondering if we could put that on the agenda for the next meeting. But does anyone else have any agenda items that we need to add?
Amy, this is Joanne. I think I had asked information on the 18+ program, and Stephanie, I did receive an email from Stephanie that I think guidelines were being put together and that information would be available in the spring. So wondering, is February too soon?
I can follow up with that person and see, and if that information is available, we can put that on that agenda.
Okay.
I definitely think we need to schedule in some time to work on the recommendations, either in our small groups or as a group as a whole. So I'm just gonna put report updates on our list.
So I saw this morning we got public comment from Randy Turner about deaf interpreter specialists and funding and things like that. So she provided that public comment. It sounds like she is willing to give that public comment in person at our next meeting. I'm wondering, we can also ask her to make a presentation if we think that's something we want to spend more than 3 minutes on at the next meeting. We could add that as an agenda item and give her more than just public comment time. Okay.
I know that there's been a new bill on seizure protocol. So I'm hoping we can either get somebody to come talk to us about that, or I'll do some research on how that's being implemented and we'll talk about it. So putting that there is a possibility.
So is that something you want somebody from TEA to come and talk to you about?
I'm possibly. I think it would be good to find out what LEAs are doing to implement that new bill. It was just passed this session, maybe even part of one of the special sessions. So that would be nice if we could get an update on how that's being implemented. Because
it's the new seizure protocol that was just passed. Is that what you're talking about?
The new seizure protocol bill.
Okay, for LEAs. Okay.
Helpful for the Student Health and Safety Committee to know whether or not we need to add more recommendations around that based on how it's being implemented.
And do you want Kristen to come back to give an overview like she typically does, or?
Of course.
Okay. I did hear back from my point of contact at Region 13, and February 23rd is available, so we can go ahead and solidify that date.
That is fantastic. Thank you for doing that.
You're welcome. Also on this agenda, one of the things we were supposed to do were to approve I think it was June. It was a June meeting that we still have hanging on. So because Claudia is not here, I think we'll just have to carry that over till February.
Okay. Stephanie, can you follow up with Claudia to make sure that she can make the 23rd?
Yes, I can do that.
Thank you. So with that being said, can I get a motion to adjourn the meeting? Well, the public part of the meeting, so that then we can break into our work groups.
I so move.
Do I have a second?
I second. This is Tara.
All in favor of officially adjourning the meeting?
Aye.
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 Hi.
Aye.
All right, meeting is adjourned.